Và sau đây xin mời hai đứa con của anh có đôi lời gửi đến quý vị qua các ngày hôm nay. Xin mời hai cháu.
Good evening, esteemed guests, friends, family, and loved ones. Today we are gathered to celebrate the life of my father, Nguyễn Ngọc Duy. Together with my mother, my brother, and the rest of our family, I want to welcome you and thank you for your presence here tonight. When I sat down to write this address, I was overwhelmed by the enormity of the task. How can I convey in words who my father was, what he has accomplished, the people he touched and inspired? Everybody here knew him in a different way. To my late Manoy, he was a son. He was born in Quang Ai, in the heart of Vietnam, and grew up on the family farm tending to animals. My Uncle Peter tells me that he was a carefree son, the fifth of 6 siblings. Things changed during the Vietnam War, and my father was forced to leave his home in search of freedom. In 1979, when he was 20 years old, he left everything he knew, everything he owned behind, boarded a small, overcrowded boat, and risked his life to go to Indonesia, where he lived in a refugee camp. At that humble camp, filled with other war-afflicted refugees, he met the person who would change his life. To my mother, he was a devoted husband. In 1980, they met for the first time. They did not know each other in Vietnam, but their paths crossed in that refugee camp. My dad was the first in his family to leave his home, but my mom was the last on her side. Her family had already started to set down roots in California, and they wanted her to immigrate there with them. But she chose instead to go with my dad to Canada and build a life here. When my dad first arrived in Canada on a cold February day, he was wearing shorts, a threadbare t-shirt, and a pair of slippers. He spoke very little English, and he had never seen snow before. Despite every disadvantage, he pushed himself to create a better life for himself and for his family. He mastered the English language, and he eventually owned his own print production business, where he worked tirelessly to provide for our family. When it came to the print shop, my dad was a perfectionist. He took his time with every task, no matter how big or how small. And if that required that he start over from scratch, well, then you start over from scratch. I don't think there's anyone in our family who hasn't spent many hours in that shop helping him collate papers, punch holes, and bind books. He worked long hours, often skipping meals and losing out on sleep. As a boy, I remember calling him late at night, pleading with him to come home. My mother, brother, and I spent many summers, weekends, and evenings helping him in the shop. One summer I asked him, "Dad, will you teach me how to run the shop?" He told me no. "I have worked this hard so that you and your brother won't have to." He always wanted what was best for us, and he always wanted us to have more than he did. He wanted us to have an education and a life here. But no matter how busy my dad was, he always made time for things that were important, for his family, for his community. In his spare time, he loved to go fishing, watch movies, and eat seafood, especially lobster. He loved to be around other people, whether it meant talking to strangers or sharing a meal with his friends and with his family. He was always generous with his time and loved connecting with others. My dad was a man who was deeply committed to his community. He was a devout Catholic and an activist, spending much of his free time focused on community work. He organized events, led protests, and held fundraisers, working to raise the profile of Vietnamese Canadians and help integrate them into Canadian society. And to me, most importantly, he was a father and grandfather. My father was dedicated to his family. He spoke often about the importance of family, instilling those values in us from an early age. He loved having people around him and always had an easy smile. I knew my dad as a principled man. He always seemed to know right from wrong, and often he saw things in black and white. This sometimes led to disagreements between us, and I would find myself saying, "He is impossible. He is so stubborn." But if I complained to my mom, or to my uncle, or to my aunt, they would tell me, "He is impossible, and he is stubborn, just like his sons." As I grew older and had children of my own, it became easier for me to understand him and the way that he was. My father understood duty, and he understood sacrifice. He gave of himself every single day to better his family and his community. He instilled in those around him a sense of justice and conviction. And he led not only with his words, but by his example. Last year when my dad got sick, everything seemed to happen so fast. He grew weaker and more frail by the day. But for every bit of strength that he lost, his family and his community came and did the best they could for him. I want to thank everyone who is here present with us today. When my dad became sick, there's no effort or expense spared to provide him with the very best care. I want to thank the doctors and nurses who cared for him in the hospital, my colleagues who took him to the hospital with such compassion and grace, his friends and his family who visited him while he was ill, and the church and the clergy for their prayers. In his final days, not once did he express regret or fear. He left this world surrounded by his family, peacefully and without pain. Finally, I want to thank my brother and my mother, who never left his side and showered him with love until his very last breath. It was so hard for us saying goodbye to him, but I know he left us with nothing but love in his heart. And our tears were not for him, but for us to go on without him. And so today, we say farewell to him, my father, a dedicated husband, a loving father, a doting grandfather, and a pillar of our community. I know that words could never be enough to express the love and gratitude that we feel for you, the depth of our grief in your absence. And so instead I make this promise. Well, I promise to love our family the way that you did. I promise to remember all that you have sacrificed to give us such a beautiful life here in Canada. And I promise that your example and your spirit will live on in our hearts, in the hearts of your community, and those of generations to come. Thank you.
Cảm ơn cháu Việt. Kính thưa quý vị, vừa rồi là bài chia sẻ của trưởng Nam. Sau đây xin mời cháu Nam là thứ Nam của anh Duy. Chú xin mời con.
Kính thưa các cha, các cô chú bác, anh chị em thân mến, gia đình chúng con xin gửi lời cảm ơn đến các cha đã đến để cùng dâng lễ cầu nguyện cho bố chúng con. Chúng con cũng xin cảm ơn tất cả những người đã không ngại đường xa đến đây để tiến đưa ba lần cuối. Gia đình chúng con vô cùng cảm kích trước sự hiện diện của tất cả quý vị. Bố chúng con là một người con hiếu thảo, một người chồng yêu thương, một người cha nghiêm khắc nhưng tuyệt vời, và một người ông luôn thương yêu con cháu. Bố đã hy sinh cả cuộc đời và tất cả những gì bố biết để tìm kiếm một tương lai tươi sáng hơn cho chúng con. Bố đã rời xa gia đình, người thân yêu, và chấp nhận rủi ro lớn nhất của cuộc đời mình. Nhiều người đã mất mạng ngoài biển vì chất lượng tàu thuyền kém, bị cướp biển sát hại. Họ ước tính rằng có khoảng 500.000 người đã mất mạng ngoài biển. May mắn thay, bố mẹ chúng con đã đến được các trại tị nạn và cuối cùng đến Canada. Bố là một người đàn ông tuyệt vời của gia đình, một người công giáo trung thành và là một chiến sĩ tự do. Có một câu tục ngữ Việt Nam mà ai cũng quen: công cha như núi Thái Sơn, nghĩa mẹ như nước trong nguồn chảy ra. Một lòng thờ mẹ kính cha, cho tròn chữ hiếu mới là đạo con. Bây giờ khi con đã trưởng thành, con mới thực sự hiểu được ý nghĩa của câu này. Con ước gì bố có thể ở bên chúng con cho khi già. Con muốn bố được thấy các cháu lớn lên, nhưng dù có đau lòng bao nhiêu, con biết rằng nỗi đau của mẹ còn lớn hơn nhiều. Con muốn bố yên tâm, con sẽ hết lòng gìn giữ và bảo vệ cho mẹ. Tất cả những gì chúng con có thể làm bây giờ là tôn vinh kỷ niệm của bố và sống hết mình. Chúng con sẽ sống một cuộc đời xứng đáng với di sản của bố và chăm sóc, yêu thương lẫn nhau như bố hằng mong muốn. Con không chỉ nói về gia đình ruột thịt, mà con nói về đại gia đình của ba, bố, với các cô chú bác, anh chị em, các cháu. Con cũng muốn nói đến gia đình, nhà thờ của bố, cộng đồng Toronto và Mississauga, nhóm thân tín hôn nhân và ca đồng Scarborough. Và con cũng không quên gia đình chiến sĩ tự do của bố, Hội người Việt, Ủy ban và các tổ chức khác nhau. Tất cả chúng con đều là gia đình của bố, và chúng mình phải làm cho bố tự hào. Con biết rằng bố luôn dõi theo chúng mình mỗi ngày và sẽ mỉm cười khi thấy gia đình lớn của mình tiếp tục công việc mà ba đã bắt đầu. I wanted to translate a small portion of my speech for our English-speaking friends and family. In Vietnamese, we have a famous proverb that I never fully appreciated until now. Công cha như núi Thái Sơn. A father's effort and duty is like a mountain, monumental, unwavering, and powerful. Nghĩa mẹ như nước trong nguồn chảy ra. A mother's love is like water from a spring that sustains life. It is unconditional and never ending. Một lòng thờ mẹ, kính cha. With a heart full of piety, we honor our mother and respect our father. cho tròn chữ hiếu mới là đạo con. This is the way, this is the code, and the mantra of a dutiful son. Thank you, Dad, for being my mountain, my guiding light. A shining example for not only our family, but for everyone whose life you touched. On behalf of our family and friends, thank you everyone for sharing in our loss. Dad, even though you're gone from this earth, I love you forever. And I know that you'll live on forever in the hearts and lives of everyone that you touched. Thank you.